Is the Ark of the Covenant beneath the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount? And why in Israel is archaeology, an innocuous scientific field, so political, even dangerous? Well, let's find out. Welcome to the Can I Trust the Bible live stream. I'm Raj Nair here in San Diego, and on your screen, you will see two legends, Sergio and Rhoda from the Sergio and Rhoda in Israel YouTube channel. My friends, how are you?
Hey Raj, good to see you. You're excellent. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. You guys are in Nazareth, but let's talk about what's going on in Jerusalem, specifically the Temple Mount. Now, the Temple Mount is an absolutely wild place. It's unlike any other place, really, in the entire country because it's just so unbelievably sensitive. And you guys did a video when you walked up there, and it's precarious. It's always the flashpoint for conflict. So why do you think there is this inkling that the Ark of the Covenant might be up there somewhere?
That's a great question. So I think that kind of started a while back, though. So there was a rabbi before we even answer this, actually, I think it's important to understand that we're actually no experts. I know we have these videos out of Israel about stuff that sound like expert, but real life information has been found, and we're from what I see in your show, we're kind of probably one of the greatest skeptics of everything that's been discovered. So we go and we want to see it with our own eyes or validate it. And so with the Ark of the Covenant, from what I understood, it's pretty much almost everywhere in the world from where they think it is. In Jerusalem, there was an eyewitness who said, hey, he's seen it back after the 6-Day War. Was Rabbi Getz, I believe his name is. And he said, hey, he's seen it. It's right there. They couldn't excavate it because it started another world war. And so there was another account that mentioned that they've seen it there. And yeah, that's at least the story that we hear. But where's the evidence? That's the question.
One of the answers. Go ahead, sorry.
One of the answers we hear sometimes is that the Ark of the Covenant is not lost, it's hidden.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, one of my favorite things about your YouTube channel is just that how thorough you are in your investigations, how well read you guys. I mean, you guys always whip out these documents, these historic artifacts, validating and proving. And it's not just like, oh, some tour guide told me this. And I think that's why your YouTube channel is so brilliant. And I think, even talking about the actual Temple Mount itself, just to give people some perspective, the Temple Mount is about 29 American football fields big. This thing is absolutely massive. And there's so much happening. When you go to the Western Wall tunnels, it's like a labyrinth under there where it's like, okay, it's close to this, and you're where am I? But one of the things that I always found really interesting is if you go to the Western Wall Plaza during Shabbat, there's this little opening kind of closer to where the Holy of Holies used to be, and you walk in, and there's nothing but kind of ultra Orthodox folks in there. But what's really cool is the acoustics in this room that's really close to the Holy of Holies. It's overwhelming, and so you have all these people singing these songs, and it's almost like electric spiritual feeling on Shabbat in these tunnels, in these holes in the Western Wall. And then you'll hear on top of the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque call it the call to prayer, which I think is one of the loudest call to prayers in the entire world for the Islamic faith. And there's just so much spiritual tension that it's hard to kind of quantify or qualify unless you've been there. So I watched recently your video of you guys walking on top of the Temple Mount. What was your experience like up there?
I would say tension.
Tension. That's that kind of people. What do you feel? Tension.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of surreal, like you're saying. I think you're absolutely right to have this almost a spiritual warfare happening in that place. And that maybe it's psychological, maybe it's in our heads, but definitely that's what we felt tension. Just from the way you even enter the place, the way it's guarded by different religions, different sanctions, and it's pretty tense.
You're briefed security-wise, like you're briefed about what to do, what not to do. You're given rules not to upset, not to offend, not to just keep it to yourself. Don't hold hands even. like so many rules. So you're up there and you're already like, oh my goodness, I have to follow all these rules.
Yeah, and it's quite tense.
Yeah, well, I've been to Israel 30 times. I've only been up on the Temple Mount maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times, just because it's such a process to get up there. But that leads me to another question, which is, why is archaeology in Jerusalem, why has it become not only political but even dangerous? I used to lead groups of people to Israel, and there was this one story where we're with a bunch of Instagrammers. This was probably 6, 7 years ago, when Instagram was about photos. Now it's about reels. But we were over by the Ophel, the kind of the southern steps of the Temple Mount, and there are these ropes that say, hey, don't cross here. And the photographer's like, yo, listen, we cross every rope to get the cool shot. Who's going to care if we cross this rope? Ha ha ha. And they crossed the rope. I think they saw a cat. I'm not kidding you. And they saw a cat, and they went to take the photo of this cat. Within seconds, I mean seconds, out of nowhere, 2 or 3 armed Israeli police officers were like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Where are you going? And the photographers, from like Seattle and Portland, are like freaked out. Like, we're just going to take this photo. Like, do you understand how sensitive this area is? And I'm like, no, we're just taking photos. They're like, listen, there is this libel against the Jewish state that somehow the Jewish state is trying to blow up the Al-Aqsa mosque or do excavations under the Temple Mount, which is totally forbidden. And so it's like, oh my gosh, you're saying crossing this little tiny rope could spark a war? And they're like, yeah, so don't do it. And they never did after that. But what I find so interesting is how immensely politically sensitive it is. I'll give you one more quick story. So one of the times I was on the Temple Mount, I was with 2 American pastors, both Mexican dudes, amazing guys. And we're just up there kind of like, wow, this is really cool. And 2 ultra Orthodox looking folks walked up to the Temple Mount. All HE double hockey sticks broke loose. Suddenly, there's these 2 like very Jewish looking guys, and suddenly it was noticed that they were up there. And all of a sudden you hear this crowd doing the Allah Akbar. And we're just like, we should leave. And we're like, my friend was like, it's not that big of a deal. And then suddenly you could tell it was a big deal, and people were getting angry, and people were like, oh my gosh, this is actually kind of threatening. We should leave. And so I saw the video you guys did recently in Akeldama, which is amazing, but you guys accidentally walked into Silwan, which is an Arab, Palestinian Arab neighborhood in Jerusalem, and you guys were scared. Why is being in the wrong place so precarious in different parts of Jerusalem?
Yeah, it hasn't always been like this. As to why, I think the politics kind of politics speak for themselves as to why there is this battle. The Palestinians who live there think that, if the Jews dig something out, they will use that as a case against them to say, hey, we found some proof that this belongs to us, and so get out. But it also hasn't always been like this. In the video when we did the Temple Mount, we walked to Temple Mount, and we started digging through the records. I was shocked to find that before the establishment of Israel, it wasn't like that. So even the supreme leader, the Muslim Council of Jerusalem, he published a guide to the Temple Mount in which he speaks of Dome of the Rock and says, this is beyond dispute, is where Solomon's temple stood. Mm-hmm. This is where, and I'm thinking, well, maybe Suleiman could still speak of the Quran and the Muslim faith, but then he mentions this is where David built an altar to the Lord, and now is referencing so some of the prophets from Judaism. So back then, it wasn't like something to even argue about. Hey, yeah, we know this is the Temple Mount. We know this belongs to Solomon and David, or belonged to Solomon and David. This is where it was. And now all of a sudden, after the establishment of Israel, now all of a sudden, oh, well, that is used as a case that, oh, this is the Jewish state, there's Jewish people, and so they live there, they can live here again. And now let's forget that piece of history and say this was never it. This was, the Dome of the Rock built for Muhammad for his commemoration. So, and the same goes to Akeldama, where we went. I think exactly the same story.
I think the man who met us was just upset that we were in his plot of land, even though it was full of graveyard of like the Jewish rabbis from the New Testament. And so
yeah, it had Hebrew inscription, actual
yes,
Hebrew
yes,
2,000-year-old letters. Yeah.
But he was just so upset that we were there, and he's like, this is my land, nobody's supposed to come here, and accused us of being spies. Thankfully I spoke Arabic, and I was like, no, we really aren't, we're just filming, we're so sorry, we don't mean to disturb, and we just left because we didn't want any trouble. But that was like that was the premise. He was just so upset of being on his land, and we were foreigners. He probably assumed we were Israelis, and or even both we were Jewish, and that we were there.
Yeah, and to add to that also, it wasn't very smart from us to go to begin with, and we had no idea where we're going, because I just asked a friend, hey, do we know where Akeldama is? And he's an archaeologist, and goes, yeah, here are the coordinates. And we just went there, and we're like, oh, it's in Jerusalem. And I mean, we know Jerusalem. I'm thinking, yeah, it looks safe. I didn't look twice, and it's right in the East Jerusalem, right at the border of it. But when you see on the news stuff happen in Jerusalem, when you see like fire and I see police and riots, this is where it's happening, and that neighborhood, Silwan. So if we'd known in advance, wouldn't have went without a guard or a larger group. So if you're listening to this, you're watching this, make sure that you're protected if you do go to Akeldama. That you have.
And I think that's what's so interesting is everything you just said has something fascinating behind it. So Akeldama, the field of blood, traditionally where Judas, died. And you mentioned Silwan, which comes from the Hebrew words Siloam, the pool of Siloam. And what's so interesting is you think, oh, well, this is this dangerous neighborhood, this Palestinian Arab neighborhood, that must be 3 or 4 miles from the Jewish part of town or the old city. It is right on top of each other. I mean, I'm talking like maybe a like golf ball swing. I mean, you could probably hit with a 3-wood the old city, maybe not, but like it's that close. You can see it. It's right there. It's not far. Everything is on top of each other. And when you were just mentioning these Jewish tombs, if you haven't seen their video of Akeldama, it's fascinating, because here you have what's probably the tomb of Annas, the father of Caiaphas, who was at the trial of Jesus, and it's just there being used by these guys as a barn, and it's gross, and there's trash everywhere, and it's like, guys, this is a direct connection to the pages of the Old Testament, and all you see is garbage, like literally animal poop and like Coke cans. And that's what's so hard, I think, for people to understand about Israel. In Israel, or if you took one little sliver of Jerusalem and you put it in New York City, they'd build a museum around it. But where you guys are, it's just like you guys are just tripping over this stuff, and no one seems to know. And when people ask me, like, what do you miss about Israel? What do you miss about, going over there? And yes, the answer is, of course, I miss the people. The food's amazing. But I would say 2 things. Number one, it's seeing those light bulbs go off for people that have never been there. But then number 2, it's the fact that the Bible isn't a book about way back when. The Bible is happening now. The Bible is current. It's up to date. Even the prophecies, it's like, wow, like that just happened, or that's happening. I was reading this morning in 1 Samuel about a very famous story, David and Goliath. And this one verse really hit me. And it's a pretty famous verse. It's 1 Samuel 17, chapter 10. And I looked at him like, my goodness, not much has changed. This verse that I'm about to read was written 3,000 years ago, 1,000 years before Jesus. This is how old this stuff is. And if you're watching and you don't know this, the word Palestine, Palestinians, comes from the etymology of the word Philistines. They're not Philistines because the Philistines were an extinct race, but it was a renaming of the ancient Jewish enemy Philistines. So even today, in the Arabic language, there's no really F sound, or no really P sound. So if you ask a Palestinian, who I have lots of friends who are Palestinians, to say their name, they would say Palestine. It's still on their tongues. And what's really interesting is if you look at this, so it says, then the Philistine said, this is Goliath. This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. And it's like, not much has changed. You have people in the same area, or in the Gaza area, the Philistines, the Palestinians. They're not the same one in people group, but it's like this repeating of history. It pops off the page to me when I read the Bible, where it's like, this isn't yesteryear. This has happened. This is happening. And then when I read Ezekiel and Isaiah 53, it's like, wow, like it is just so unbelievably rich of what God is up to right now. So as people who live in Israel, in Nazareth, who are, followers of Yeshua, who spend their days finding the footsteps of the Bible, how do you see God moving now?
That's a great question.
Great question. I'll start from something that happened this morning, because we just came back from Jerusalem. We spent there a night yesterday, and went there with Rhoda's parents, and we filmed a little bit, went to City of David. And on the way back, we're driving, and it took us an hour and a half to get back from Nazareth, from Jerusalem to Nazareth. And it's really fast. Usually it takes 2 hours, 2.5. And the whole road was just primarily felt kind of flat, even though there are hills and there are mountains even, but to us it felt flat. And my father-in-law he turns to me and says, hey, think about this. Isn't this interesting? Like that prophecy in Isaiah 40, where it says every valley shall be raised up and every mountain and hill made low. And he's like, maybe the Israeli people don't realize this, but even this very road that has been built here, and it's a new highway, Highway 6, and it's amazing. It's just this, it's really, there's like hills up and down, but it's relatively, you're driving one speed the entire time. From most of the country, most of half of the country you drive through, and we're like, wow, yeah, it's like a prophecy coming to fruition, even though the prophecy is so much wider, so much richer. Obviously, this is just like a little speck of it, maybe. But it was a cool realization. It's like, wow, yeah, even the people don't even realize that. Maybe some people don't believe it, but they're living a lot of the prophecies that have been told and are yet to be fulfilled. It's kind of been exciting to live here this time. And growing up here, I'm Jewish by heritage. My grandma, Holocaust survivor. We made Aliyah in '92 with my parents. But my dad, he was an atheist, actually. But yeah, so when I was very little, he's like, no, there's no God unless you prove it in the formula. And then one day he was challenged, like, well, look up a formula. He started reading mathematicians, and he found out they were all great believers, like Pascal, who believed in God, and all the mathematics is because he believed in God. And so he started learning more and more and more, and came to conclusion God must be real, and then just reason to find who he is, and that led him to Jesus. And then I grew up knowing Jesus. And so back then, when we were growing up, we're just a few of us. That's Rhoda and I met. Today, more and more of Israelis and Jews and Arabs are opening their eyes to Jesus, to Yeshua, to understand that he is the promised Messiah who came and is yet to return.
Not only that, but like when you come to the Lord and focus on him, like in what happened with us, everything else becomes secondary. Like, who does this land really belong to, and who is this land for, and all these discussions. You just want to focus on Christ and what he has done, because he has just saved you from, the pits of hell. And so none of it can even become equal or a matter of concern with that. And so you just want to focus on that. And when Jesus is the focus, and we see that when Jews and Palestinian believers come together, when Jesus is the focus, you see the unity, you see the love, and you see the impact they can have on the surrounding around them. Other than that, all you hear and see is just bitterness, and people are upset and angry and and hurt on both sides and everything. And so yeah, when the focus is Jesus, it's amazing. And that has brought a lot of the Jewish people to believe, and they are now being used. Like, it's not a foreigner Jesus that is coming from the outside. It is somebody who's local, who's walked this land, who is part of this people, and it's becoming more relative to them to open their eyes and accept him. And I think that's been great to see too.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the comments on one of our YouTube channels said something that just really struck me. He said, Jesus is like a Greek implant on Judaism. I'm like, no, he was born in Judea, which fulfills prophecy in Micah. He grew up following the law of Moses. He was killed in Jerusalem. I mean, this guy is a thoroughly Jewish individual. In fact, even in the book of Revelation, toward the end, he's called the root of David. I mean, this guy is a thoroughly Jewish person. And you know, for the past decade and more, a lot of my life has been explaining the conflicts happening in that land. And I think you guys absolutely nailed it, which is the only real solution. Because if you actually look at the current situation, unless there is just some cataclysmic change, I mean, it's so unimaginably complicated. You know, even this statement where, you know, what would be the state of Palestine, the West Bank, I think like 80% of the Old Testament happened in there. So that'll, in my opinion, I just don't see that happening. Maybe, I don't know. But, you know, when it comes to my Palestinian friends, my Jewish friends, man, when they lift up the name of Yeshua, wow, what a difference that makes. And so I think a lot of people just don't know what to do, especially here in the West. So what would your encouragement be? Like, how can people pray for what seems like kind of a hopeless situation? What would be your encouragement?
Yeah, my first request for prayer would be for the body of believers. If you know Jesus, if you know the Lord, pray for those brothers and sisters here, both Jews and Arabs. I mean, half my family is Arab and my family is Jewish. So pray for both, that the Lord will give them the strength, the zeal, the encouragement, and just that unlimited patience that only God can give through Christ, through His Spirit, to be able to be a light to the people in this nation today, because we're seeing so much hate, so much pain, so much suffering, to the degree that couple weeks ago, or just long ago, we went and we had to do something. We went to a certain place, one of the government facilities, to get some documents, and it was one of the most kind of like a day of revelation to say, wow, what has happened to the country, to the people since the break of war. And we see this stark difference of people are so bitter that they cannot even accept a compliment. I've tried to give a compliment for 3 different people, and each one rejected, and they almost cursed me back, thinking I'm mocking them. And I had to go back and say, no, I'm serious. I really mean it. And they wouldn't accept it because they're so used to bickering, politics, fighting even among themselves, same groups of people. It's not like we're talking about political issues here. And I think we can see it around the world as well. So the prayer request would be for the people who have the light, that it may shine bright, that they may not be downcast by this darkness, by this situation, and focus on Christ, like you said, fix our eyes on Jesus and share the gospel.
Those around you, put aside the political things and just share the gospel.
And Sergio, you're ethnically Jewish, and Rhoda, you're ethnically Arab. So hey, you guys did it somehow. So you guys are the model of peace. So let's just
what? You're Arab?
Oh man. You know, if I did that to my wife,
outside of the screen.
Right, totally. Well, I'll tell you what, let's wrap it back up with a little bit more of the archaeology as the last question. So what archaeological thing has really excited you guys? So first off, do you know where the Ark of the Covenant is? And if not, that's cool. But what archaeological thing really fires you guys up?
Wow.
The Ark of the Covenant is in Oak Island. If you know the show,
that's one of my favorite shows. But yeah, you know what? Well, it could be. The thing is, the Ark of the Covenant, it's an amazing topic. In fact, we have 2 episodes coming up where we actually try and find it. And so you know this. You heard about the Copper Scroll.
Yeah.
Obviously, I know that some people haven't. So in the Dead Sea, they found the manuscripts, Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest manuscripts for the Hebrew Bible, one of the most amazing discoveries ever. And then in them, they also find the Copper Scroll that is just made out of copper, and it had on it a list of about 50 caves where the treasure of the Temple Mount is hidden or placed for safe storage and even hiding. And so one of the caves had a pretty clear description. It had a name of the river next to it. It had the description of how it looks like, where to go,
how to get to
it. And so a couple of decades ago, an American enthusiast historian partnered up with an Israeli archaeologist, one of our friends, and they went digging and they found that very tunnel, that cave.
Wow.
That tunnel goes really deep. It's like, I don't remember, 300 feet or something, 400 feet. And so he took us there. I don't want to reveal what we found because we haven't released it yet, but it's pretty fascinating. And then the second, so obviously, well, have you found the Ark of the Covenant? The second place is there's this theory that I think it was started with Rabbi Getz, that he saw the Ark of the Covenant under the Temple Mount in one of the shafts, a Warren shaft close to the edge, right under the dome. Now, today, obviously, you can't dig there because you'll start a world war. But
literally.
So, but we got an opportunity, very rare opportunity to do something. And so there is access to a tunnel that goes directly under the Temple Mount. And we were told you cannot go there because A, you'll start a third world, two, there's no oxygen. It's deep and it's been shut for decades. But we're like, what if we build a robot? So we built a robot and we sent the robot down there. We haven't released the video yet. It's still going to be in the making next month or two. So we'll release it there. But we found something pretty cool, which requires further investigation. We could be a step closer to the Ark. Who knows? But
breaking news.
I'll finish with this.
Sergio and Rhoda's YouTube channel has found the Ark of the Covenant. You heard it here first.
Well, and lastly, I wanted to mention this. We got to speak to one of the chief rabbis from right in front of the Western Wall. You got the Jewish quarter, and you got one of those big buildings. One of them is the synagogue, the main synagogue, and you got the Aish Center. So one of the buildings, we got to meet one of the chief rabbis, and we asked him the same question. He's like, hey, is it real? Have you found the Ark of the Covenant? Is it under the Temple Mount? You know what he told us?
He didn't really answer.
He just looked, he smiled, he had this little it's like a
twinkle in the eye, and then he changed.
And then he changed subject and started talking about, well, if you guys come next time, I need to show you something. We can't talk about it, so you can't show it to anybody, but I need to show you something we have in our building, but it's not like, I was like, okay, it'll be off the record. So we'll see. So I think there are interesting theories. One of the most interesting one, which confirms under the Temple Mount, which actually we never shared this with anybody. I don't think anybody knows this, but everybody can have access to it. If you just read the Chronicles account of the two pillars in a temple that Solomon built, and then you read Jeremiah 52, you'll find discrepancies. One lists 96 pomegranates on them, those little decorations, and the chain, and the other one lists 100. So something happened between those two dates, that between some of the kings that were added to the pillars. And it says in Jeremiah, the pillars are hollow. And if you calculate the size of them, they're huge. They are 4 cubits in diameter, 12 cubits in circumference, so 12 in diameter. And the Ark of the Covenant has only 2 cubits at its widest part if you measure from one side to the other. So imagine if some of the pomegranates were made in such a way there is a chain that you somehow remove, it becomes a device where you, in emergency, somebody's charging the siege, you can lower the Ark of the Covenant under the ground in a safe way, like an elevator. There's sand underneath. This theory was introduced to me by Charlie Garrett from Sarasota. He found it. He's got this pictographic memory. He can remember every quote from every movie ever released. And so he looked this up, and he just like, hey, why is there a difference?
Not only that, like if you read I think it's the Jeremiah account, it tells you how the Babylonians came and destroyed everything, and it lists a lot of things, including the pillars. But then at the end it says concerning the pillars, and then it gives you this information, and you wonder, why is this given to us? Like, why is that mentioned after all just listing the stuff that were taken or destroyed or burnt or whatever, and then but concerning the pillars, and then it continues. So it's just peculiar,
We can talk about this all day, probably not enough time.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, there aren't many YouTube channels I would recommend more than the Sergio and Rhoda in Israel YouTube channel. You guys are doing amazing things. You're doing God's work. I cannot recommend you, if you're watching this, to subscribe. to like all of what they're doing. You're going to find it so not only interesting and fascinating, but research. You're going to find that they're doing their homework. And so you can have confidence in sharing their videos, confidence that the content that you're consuming hasn't just been put together willy-nilly, but they've really dug into this, as you can tell from how they're describing what they are about to release. So again, we're going to obviously have to have you back on. If you did find the darn thing, we're going to have you back on like next week. But that is absolutely fascinating. Thank you guys again so much, for coming on, and we will be talking to you again very, very soon. My friends, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Raj Nair. Thank you for watching the Can I Trust the Bible YouTube channel. We hope this video gave you compelling evidence to trust in the validity of the Bible. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And ask your questions in the comments and share the video with your friends and skeptics. Thanks for watching. See you next time.